My name is Mona Gazala, and I am an artist. From the time I was a child, I was always fascinated by archaeology. There were these treasures discovered and structures and things left behind, and they told a story of the people that were here before us and how they lived and what they believed. Sometimes in my artistic practice, I imagine myself as an urban archaeologist, sifting through the debris and the dirt that others find undesirable and finding that treasure, that knowledge and value in it, the stories behind it. And then sometimes I also like discovering the common threads that tie us as human beings together.
The object I've chosen for this work is my grandfather's pocket knife. Tiny, broken, it's a Swiss, and it's kind of got the Swiss logo half rubbed off from there. And it doesn't necessarily have a major meaningful significance other than a reminder of him. He's my dad's dad, and I think back, this thing itself doesn't necessarily kind of harken any particular memory, but the memory of him, memory of my dad. Grandfather's passed away, dad still alive, and then just kind of seeing how traits, mannerisms, attitudes have been picked up through those generations. So that's what this kind of is a reminder of. It's something that he used, that I still use daily, opening boxes, that kind of stuff. So it's not precious per se, and it's got gunk on it and whatnot, so it itself isn't precious, but it's one of those things that is in my pocket all the time, and I think I'll carry until it probably loses its function. I'm not sure that'll be an interesting day when this doesn't function as an object anymore, and to what happens with my use of carrying it after that. But it's really what it comes down to is it reminds me of him, and just, the general personification of my grandfather, and not really one specific memory.
So the object I chose is broken glass. Broken glass is an element that's consistent with a lot of my photos. I like to take pictures of things that are surreal and that are personal. And I like the idea that you're reflecting on yourself. Literally by looking in the glass, you see yourself in there. Is a symbolism that has a deeper meaning with that. And I like the idea that something that literally could be construed as trash or something that you would throw away could be something that could create so many elements in a picture, so many layers, where you can really distort the idea of what's literally happening and confuse the viewer. So in my work, the way that I've incorporated it is by generally taking self-portraits or portraits of people I've been intimate with or had a certain kind of relationship with, and I will break the glass and have fragments generally of them in the pictures that I do double exposures with, to kind of create an evocative mood of how I feel about this person or how I feel about myself. And I I just think it's interesting that you could take something that other people would think is trash and it could create so many elements in your pictures that are so multifaceted and so personal.
This is a ceramic serving dish, and it came to me from my ceramics professor at the University of Florida. Her name is Linda Arbuckle, and I myself am a maker of functional pottery, and so I know how this was made, and so when I use it, which is actually rarely because it's so important that I'm scared to use it, I think about the process that she went through and that her hands actually touched this. And so having moved away from Florida now and being in Ohio, it's been actually really difficult because I feel like I'm so separate from this person that influenced me so deeply. And she was a mentor in a way that I've never experienced in my life until I met her. And it's hard to actually put into words like what she did for me, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that I wouldn't be sitting here right now holding this bowl if I hadn't met her. And she was such a guide in my life. And so this bowl was given as a gift on the very last day that I was in Florida. And so I had spent 2 years studying at the University of Florida to get my master's in art education. And I'm just so in love with clay. And so I spent every semester also enrolled in clay classes. And at the end, Linda and I met for breakfast at a little place called Civilization. She was like, I have something for you. And so she had this wrapped kind of casually in bubble wrap. And I just pulled the bubble wrap away, and I couldn't believe that I was being gifted something so precious. And I know so many people who have gone to Florida and left without a Linda piece. And so I felt just this overwhelming feeling. And so I knew that I would cherish this object forever.
My object is a kind of a morbid object. It's a decapitated head of a Virgin Mary statue. It was part of an installation I did in, I think, about 2011. It was in the city, in the Waterloo Arts District. It was an installation based off of a book, and I always loved Gothic art, and always have just been fascinated with the Virgin Mary herself, and just there was something kind of like that just told me to kind of put it into the installation. It seemed really relevant at the time, and it just felt right. And it's kind of covered in blood, and I battered the face up a little more to give it a little more of an aged look. But just the picture of it in the sink in pieces, shattered, sort of like the mother of all religion, just shattered in the sink, seemed very profound to me at the time, and sort of resonated with my own sense of religion and beauty and almost femininity too, which was really particularly relevant to the passage that I had to represent in the installation. I've kind of held on to it for a couple of years. I still don't know why. Just to look at it and to hold it and the face of it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, I actually left it in my windowsill, and every once in a while it catches my eye and I look at it. And it just has these piercing blue eyes, some of the resonance or some of the residue blood left over, fake blood on his face. And just the antiquity of it is just kind of fascinating.
Alright, so what I brought is this globe that was gifted to me after my grandfather passed away. And what makes it special is actually not the crab or the shell, but the chemical compound that makes up the inside. My grandfather worked for Dow Chemicals, and he invented this sort of gel, and it's actually in all of baby diapers now. It's a powder, and once it's exposed to water, it becomes a gel. So I have like maybe 5 to 10 of these globes that he made and that my grandma left for me. So that's it.
So this is a pinch pot, stoneware glass made by my cousin Eileen for a project she did in her undergrad. She created hundreds of them and had this idea that they would go across the world and just be given to people as tokens that they could take with them. Unfortunately, she passed away shortly, about 2 years after this project, and at her funeral we were all asked if we would take one and take them with us wherever we went. So I have been carrying it with me since then, just wherever I go in the world and in life. And so I'll actually be going to grad school in the fall at the School of the Art Institute Chicago, which is where Eileen is originally from, Chicago. And I'm very proud to take it back with me and hope that I can kind of live out her own little part of that dream. To have it with her, and it's just been a very personal object, and I like its size. That it can just kind of become a little worry stone at times too. So it's very intimate, and it's very interesting to know that how these were made, to also be an artist and to know that they are made by hand and very quickly, but that they do each like bear her own thumbprint.
So this is my cast iron skillet. I've had it since 2010, 2011, when I moved to Gainesville, Florida to go to the University of Florida for post-bac. I subleased an apartment from a former UF grad student, Kristen, and along with the apartment, all of her possessions were there. This skillet was hanging on the wall, and it was kind of a light gray color. I never really used it that much in Florida. I cooked eggs in it one time, and they stuck really bad. So it just kind of hung on the wall, and it was more for show. When I moved away from Florida to go to Louisiana to go to grad school, I brought the skillet with me. Kristen didn't really come back for her possessions. She came back for her bike, and the rest she wanted me to either sell on Craigslist or to keep. So I kind of inherited the skillet in an odd way. And then I moved with it to Louisiana. I lived with another roommate for a year, and the skillet actually lived in my closet because it wasn't seasoned that well at that point. My roommate who I lived with cooked a lot with cast iron skillets, and then towards the end of that year she was re-seasoning her skillet, and I kind of brought it up that I had this skillet that I wanted to use, but I wasn't really able to use it because it wasn't seasoned that well. So then she seasoned it for me a couple of times. When I moved into my own apartment for the following 2 years, I used the skillet, and I continued to use the skillet daily for pretty much most of the things that I cook, either on the stovetop or in the oven, roasting. So that's why I've chosen the skillet, is because it's a big part of my life and it gets used daily. It's part of my routine. Sometimes I eat right in the skillet, like it's a plate, so I don't have to do dishes later on, so I can go straight from the stovetop onto the pot warmer and cut right in it, they eat right in it. So it has a special place for me. It's going to be hard giving it up for this time that it's in the gallery, but one of the reasons I've chosen to give it up is because it'll allow me the opportunity to use another cast iron skillet that I have that's not seasoned that well. So I think it'll be an opportunity to highlight this object that I really, really enjoy and that means a lot to me, and to reseason another skillet that needs to get used and needs some love.
My artifacts are a couple of stones that I picked up in the Rocky River Valley 15 years ago. So that would have been the year 2000. They're important to me because they're a snapshot of where I was at that time in my life. I had just become a single mother. I was applying for subsidized daycare and still waiting to be approved, so in the meantime I was driving 20 miles out of my way every morning to drop the children off at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and on the way home from work I would pick them up and we would drive sometimes back through the Rocky River Valley on the way back home. And a couple of times a week we would stop in the valley and pick up stones and play in the water and walk through the paths in the woods. It was a real chance to teach my kids about nature, everything I knew about plants, everything I knew about animals. We would look under rocks in the river and see if we could find crayfish or try to catch minnows. So every time I look at these rocks, I remember where we were at that time, and I remember what they looked like when they were small, and I remember teaching them how to pick up rocks like this and learn how to skip stones across the river. It was a time in my life I want to remember because it was bittersweet. It was a time when people were kind of telling me that somehow I had failed or I had lost something in becoming a single mother, and yet I feel like, especially when I remember those times in the valley, I feel like I bonded with my kids then more than I ever had before, and it was a time when we first really became a family.
So my name is Gabe Michael Kenny. My artifact is this here rock that I've been lugging around with me for several years. I would say 2007, 2008 I had the rock, but it's kind of a memento from a great trip I did out in Colorado. I lived out there for 4 years in my undergrad and lived with a couple good friends of mine, and we took a long backpacking camping trip out to the hills somewhere above 12,000 feet. We were camping and we were hanging out by this waterfall, and I just happened to have my hand on this rock that shifted a bit, and when I pulled it, it removed itself from the hillside, and under it, very small, that you can see some minerals growing. There's some pyrite, a bunch of crystals of fool's gold right here, and kind of where I was sitting, you could see how the tree trunk was kind of growing into the stone itself. So looking at it, you might not be able to tell, but there's actually layers of what would be bark that turned to stone. And I kept it with me because it was a special trip. All four of us spent 2 days out there. And just one of those bonding experiences when you're young. And the weather was perfect. The scenery was perfect. The camping was perfect. And there was a reservoir up there. We had a beautiful hike. And just a really special time in my life. And I kind of saved this as a memento to not only the friends, but just my entire time in Colorado as an adventure as a whole. But I'll keep it forever, and hopefully one day I have a great fish tank to get going or something, because I feel like I should return it to the water where it came.
So this is a blanket that my grandmother crocheted, and it's made out of a whole ton ton of granny squares. It doesn't look like she had any preference on color, which I really like. I think she just kind of used what she had, and it's starting to fall apart. My dad had it and asked me if I could repair it, and I've not yet repaired it. I think it's because I don't want to give it back to him or tell him that I repaired it. And it was the grandmother that I named after, and I find a lot of power in my name. Ruth means friendship, and that's kind of a standard that I